So, a confined space is basically an area that isn't really meant for people to stay in for long periods of time, and it usually has limited or restricted ways to get in or out. These spaces are often enclosed or at least partially enclosed, and honestly, they can present some pretty serious hazards to workers just because of the environment itself. Now, according to OSHA, that's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a confined space is, first, large enough for a worker to get inside and perform tasks. It also has limited or restricted means for entry or exit, and yeah, it's not designed for continuous occupancy. Some examples you might run into include storage tanks, silos, manholes, pipelines, boilers, tunnels, ductwork, and vessels. These are all considered confined spaces, and each one comes with its own set of risks. When we talk about atmospheric hazards, there are a few things you really need to watch out for. First, a lack of oxygen, which can happen due to rusting metals or certain chemical reactions. Then, there are toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and ammonia, which can build up in these spaces. You've also got to consider flammable atmospheres, vapors or gases that could potentially cause a fire or even an explosion. And finally, asphyxiation, which can occur when something like nitrogen displaces the oxygen you need to breathe. Alright, so, when we talk about physical hazards, there's actually more to consider than you might think. Engulfment is a big one. Loose materials like grain or sand can, actually bury a worker if you're not careful. Then there's mechanical equipment. Rotating parts or moving machinery can definitely cause injury if you get too close. You also have to watch out for falling objects or even a collapse, especially in places where the environment isn't well supported. And of course, don't forget about temperature extremes. Heat stress or even hypothermia can happen pretty quickly if there's poor ventilation. Sometimes, there are hazards in confined spaces that just aren't obvious at first glance. Restricted movement, for example, can make escape or rescue really difficult if there's an emergency, and it can also increase the chances of slips, trips, and falls. Poor visibility is another thing. It can totally hinder both work and rescue operations. And then there's noise. Confined areas can actually amplify sound, which can damage your hearing or even mask important alarms. Plus, we can't forget the psychological effects. Claustrophobia, panic, or stress can show up and really impair your judgment and actions. To stay safe, it's crucial to use a confined space entry permit. This makes sure that all safety checks are done before anyone goes in. And don't forget about atmospheric testing. Always check oxygen levels, flammability, and toxicity before and during entry. So, another key thing is ventilation. You'll want to use mechanical ventilation to make sure the atmosphere inside stays safe. And of course, isolating hazards is super important. Lockout and tagout procedures are used to isolate any energy sources. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is a real lifesaver. Think respirators, harnesses, gas detectors, and protective clothing. Emergency procedures are a must too. A trained rescue team needs to be available with the right equipment at all times. And finally, workers must be trained on the risks, entry procedures, and emergency response, so everyone knows exactly what to do if something goes wrong.